Yo, what is up, DigiDestin? It's your boy TPG back at it again for another Digimon video. Today I'm going to be doing a tier list for the BT11 format and my thoughts on what will be strong and what won't be strong, so that you're prepared for not only the new format but also the national season. On top of that, I'd like to do a big shout out to PrimitiveKage. His link will be the first link in the description down below. I took inspiration from my tier list from his style of tier list to make it more informative and explain my decisions a little more, as well as helping you, the viewer, make better and more informative decisions. If you want to see more videos like this, go check out his link in the description down below where you can get the best content available from one of the best players there is. Let's hop right in. The first deck we're ranking is going to be Shoutmon X4. This is the deck that came out in set 10 when Cross was a new mechanic. This deck has access to some very powerful tamers which allow you to reduce the play cost of your Digimon cards, with this key central focal point of this deck being Shoutmon X4, who has material save 2, so when he gets deleted, you get to save 2 cards from under him under a tamer, and then on play draw 2, which is important because Digi-crossing always counts as on play. And then end of attack, by placing all the sources under one tamer, you get to unsuspend your tamer and then delete him, which allows you to save all your materials as well as allowing you to reuse your Taiki or your Zenjiro or your Akari. Now, this deck has a very powerful burst potential and rush potential because it is a very rookie-oriented deck. By playing your tamers early, you get to swing your rookies into security and just let them die, allowing you to cross with them later by saving them under your tamers. Now, the number one weakness to this deck is unfortunately the ban list. The ban list somewhat neutered this deck by limiting Sunrise Buster as well as Shoutmon X4, which were some of the key cards in this deck strategy. And there's actually some new versions of Crossheart that come in set 11 that we see that will sort of take over where this deck left off. The key cards include Shoutmon X5 from BT10, their main boss monster, Shoutmon X4, their main key piece, which is unfortunately now limited, and Taiki Kudo, which was the tamer that allowed you to cross from underneath your tamers. The next deck we're going to be ranking is going to be DarkKnightmon. So DarkKnightmon has a very strong aggro as well as very powerful tamer cards in Nene, which is another one of those cross tamers. It allows you to have DarkKnightmon and give your DarkKnightmons and Twilight's blocker, and then on deletion gain 2 memory, which is important because the aggressive potential of this deck actually comes from DarkKnightmon X, which when digivolving, you get to return a black or purple Digimon card other than DarkKnightmon X antibody from your trash to your hand. Then if DarkKnightmon or X antibody is in this Digimon's Digivolution sources, delete one tamer and unsuspend this Digimon. Now, there's a few cool things about this effect. Not only do you get to delete your Nene, which is going to give you 2 memory back, but you also could delete one of your opponent's problematic tamers, and this is very big, because you can just pass turn by going to DarkKnightmon X and get a tamer removal, as well as some materials back. And because this is a cross deck, you are going to be able to save your materials and use them again later for Digicross. Again, cross is cool. Now, the weaknesses of this deck is it is a bit inconsistent because of how Putrelion it is, but we have cards like Deadly Axemon that let us reveal top 5 to add Nightmons to our hands. But the big burst potential of this deck is somewhat later game, and in the formats we're currently in and currently expecting to be in for a while, it looks like we're going to be in more aggressive formats, so having a slower deck like DarkKnightmon X Antibody is actually suboptimal. The key cards are DarkKnightmon X Antibody from BT10, BT10 Nene Amano, the Tamer card, and then BT7's Deadly Axemon because it's going to search you the pieces you need. Next we have Jesmon. Now Jesmon is one of the strongest aggressive decks and one of the best aggressive decks we've had in the history of Digimon. It also has incredible swarm potential with a very high ceiling. And then of course Sistermon is a very nice card, and there's plenty of good Sistermons to offer you whatever utility you are actually looking for. Now, the biggest weaknesses of this deck are a few things. One, it's a bit bricky. Because of the weird ratios you have to run because of all the Sistermons you play, you can sometimes see a hand full of Jesmon cards but no Sistermon cards, or a hand full of Sistermon cards and no Jesmon cards. It's also quite piece dependent because, like the brickiness, you're going to need to have the right ratios of cards in your hand. Now, the new cards actually somewhat remedy this by allowing you to recur Sistermons from your trash as well. The key cards are going to be BT10 Jesmon X Antibody, Starter Deck 12 Jesmon, and then BT6 Savior Huckmon. Of note, the Savior Huckmon from BT6 is actually a limited card on the ban list. Next, we're going to have Phoenixmon and Marsmon. I sort of combined this because these two decks I've noticed work together best. So this deck has a very, very strong aggressive potential because of the keywords Raid and Blitz. Now, Blitz is a keyword we've had before, which allows you to swing after the security has, after the memory has passed your turn. And Raid is actually a new keyword that lets you redirect your attack. So cards like Mother D-Reaper that are immune to card effects can still be attacked over. So because of Raid, you are able to actually switch your targeted attack while you're attacking into a different Digimon, and that Digimon does not have to be suspended. This deck has a very high ceiling because of the combo potential available with the new cards such as Akihi Rindo and Marsmon itself. Phoenixmon allows for incredible consistency as well. The swarm potential of this deck also comes from Phoenixmon, which allows you to get Avians and Bird Digimon, I believe it's Bird Digimon, out onto the field for relatively cheap. The weaknesses is this deck is somewhat piece dependent, and it is also quite stack dependent. Early game, you're going to want to go for a Phoenixmon to build the board, and then you're going to want to go for Marsmon on the subsequential turns in order to get that Raid and Blitz proccing in order to help clean up your opponent's boards. The key cards are all from BT11. We have Akiho Rindo, the Tamer, on the left, the BT11 Marsmon on the right, as well as the BT11 Phoenixmon in the middle. Next, we have the new Crossheart deck, which is actually going to be Shoutmon X7. Now, this deck is sort of a beefed up version of the first deck we talked about that relies less on the Shoutmon X4 and more so on reaching this penultimate Shoutmon X7 card. And it has power cards such as Shoutmon X7. We get a strong new Tamer in Taiki, Kiriha, and Nene. It is a 3-Tamer white card. As well as we get Digimon removal within the form of Shoutmon X7 and big hitters. A lot of the new Crossheart cards are actually going to be hitting for a lot of DP as well as damage. This deck is very piece dependent, however. Because of all the Crossheart materials needed for Shoutmon X7, you're going to be digging a lot. Now, it's not that much of a problem because of how consistent this deck seems to be and how often it can draw those pieces. It is also very Tamer dependent. Cards like Death Exmon have always been the bane of cross decks, but this deck hurts it even more. Is hurt by it even more because having all these Tamers on the field just lets your opponent get this really free, Death Exmon. Now the key cards, again, most of these are new cards from BT11. We have BT11 Shoutmon X7. We have BT11 Taiki, Kiriha, and Nene. And then we have BT11 Shoutmon DX. Next up on the tier list is actually going to be Blue Flare. Now, Blue Flare I think is going to be one of the strongest decks actually going into this format because Blue Flare was relatively good now. And seeing as how we only get more strong pieces such as Greymon, I actually think this deck has very good potential. It is a very control-oriented deck, similar to the Blue Hybrid of the past where we get to stun our opponent's Digimon. It has very good search potential and Blazing Memory Boost. And it's a very consistent deck because of that search potential, as well as having cards like Blue Flare Greymon in order to search you pieces as well. It also has an aggressive boss card in the form of Metal Greymon, which is going to gain Rush as well as stunning something. And on top of that, because of the name Metal Greymon, you can actually use cards such as Metal Greymon X Antibody to Digivolve for free on top of it, as well as gaining a security check and some DP. The main weakness of this deck is it is quite Tamer dependent, and you don't have as many Tamers as the other decks. We really only have Kiriha, and if we lose Kiriha, we are in a very bad position. Now, there's plenty of ways to get Kiriha via male Bagramon and Blazing Memory Boost, but once we run out of Kirihas, we are sort of out without male Bagramon. The key cards, we have BT11 Greymon, which adds a new top end to the deck, which is going to allow for even more potential in the late game. We have BT10 Metal Greymon, the card I discussed earlier that gives you some aggressive potential in this deck. And we have BT10 Kiriha, which is our primary Tamer. Next we have MirageGaogamon. This deck, I'm going to be honest, is pretty bad. So it's trying to be a control deck by bouncing cards back to your hand, but it doesn't bottom deck. It only bounces back to hand, which is one of the worst forms of removal by just giving your opponent the card back. Sure, if you're going against a deck that makes a large stack, you get to put that stack back to their hand, which is relatively decent. It also burns, kind of. So MirageGaogamon actually removes a card from your opponent's security stack, but it gives it to their hand. So it doesn't really help all that much. The Tamer itself, Nikolai Petrov, is actually a really good card, and it synergizes with the archetype incredibly. The problem is the archetype is actually what holds it back. So the weakness is, again, we have another Tamer-dependent deck. Nikolai Petrov really helps make this deck work. It gives opponents cards, which I never really like in terms of removal. I think bottom decking cards is very, very strong, but bouncing back to the hand, especially in fast formats like this, just mean they're going to get to rebuild that stack. Yeah, and bad form of removal, again, bouncing cards to the hand isn't very good, and then burning from security is good, but burning it and giving it to their hand is not as good. Now, a lot of the cards actually proc if your opponent has 8 or more cards in hand, and I think that's what they're trying to go for. But, again, that's really reliant on your opponent. The key cards for this deck are actually going to be MirageGaogamon, from BT11, BT11 Nikolai Petrov, and BT11 Gaomon, the rookie. Next, we have a really unique deck coming in BT11, and it is Sukamon. So it's a control-based deck, and it's incredibly unique. I think this deck people may actually struggle against if they don't know what these cards do. It's also relatively budget. I forgot to add that on here, but I think the highest rarity card for this deck is actually a rare. It uses tokens, which is something that's been previously limited to Diaboromon, and now we see more token interaction. It does interact with the opponent, which is something I always like to see in Digimon decks. If it can interact with your opponent in a way that they have to play differently, it's relatively nice. Something that's not just generic bouncing or deleting is always nice to know. The weakness is it has low power and impact. It's pretty much locked to Sukamon. Now, a lot of the support that comes into the set, you'll notice, is going to be these yellow-black cards that, while only 2 of them are Sukamons, the rest are all pretty xenophobic, such as MirageGaogamon. And it relies on your opponent. So what King Sukamon actually does is you get to turn one of your opponent's cards into a white 3000 Sukamon token until the end of their next turn. And then I believe one of the cards actually allows to, oh yeah, it's the inheritable on King Sukamon. It doesn't allow for deletion by a Sukamon, so you get to protect your MirageGaogamon if you so choose to digivolve into that. So the BT11 cards you're going to need are King Sukamon, Sukamon, and MirageGaogamon. Again, all from BT11, and they're going to be bulk cards, so you should be able to build this deck with relative ease. And I actually think this deck, out of the low tier decks, has the most potential to go up depending on player creativity. Next we have Machinedramon. Now Machinedramon gets a really big boost in this set. Not only does it get a new Machinedramon, it also gets Analog Man, which is a very, very powerful card for Machinedramon. The strength of this deck is that it's actually relatively fast, despite it being a more level 5 and higher oriented deck. By playing that level 5 or your Analog Man or Analog Youth relatively early, you're going to get so much value that in the subsequent turns, you're going to be able to get Machinedramon out really easily. It's a control-based deck. We see a lot of control with Machinedramon, such as the D-Digivolve off of Chaosdramon, and then getting to play out Machinedramon again, as well as the original Machinedramon from EX1, allowing to redirect attacks and forcing your opponent to attack it, and then getting to block with it and protect itself. It's a big stack deck, so you're going to have a lot of materials in your sources, all of which are going to be level 4 to 5 mostly. And then you're going to probably have a 6 and a 7 or just 2 6s in your stack as well for very big stacks. And the Tamers are some of the most powerful in the game, but they are relatively xenophobic to Machinedramon, such as Analog Man. The weaknesses of this deck is it can be a little bit bricky because you have to play so much top end. Sometimes you can just open dead cards, which you have to rely on your low end, so oftentimes it'll play different colored eggs, usually blue or purple, and then a low blue or purple rookie count in order to get value off those eggs and draw cards. It can also be easily played around. Uh, the impact that Machinedramon has, the control aspect of it, isn't too impactful, so your opponent can play around it by just leaving and raising until they're ready to kill you. And the costs are very heavy. Your turn 1, if you go first, you're oftentimes, if you're lucky, you can slap down an Analog Man and pass your opponent to 1 or 2. But if you're unlucky and you don't have Analog Man, you'll often have to give your opponent 5 to 8, which is very bad. The key cards for this deck are BT11 Machinedramon, EX3 Chaosdramon, as well as BT11 Analog Man. Next we have BlackWarGreymon X. This is anticipated to be the best deck out of set 11, and let's go over why. The deck is incredibly versatile, with the ability to switch from an aggressive style of deck to a control style of deck on a dime. It, again, has that control aspect with cards like BlackWarGreymon and Gallantmon, as well as the new BlackWarGreymon X. But it has powerful stacks because of the Greymon red line that it gets to run in the low end. It's also very consistent for the most part. You have a new tamer, Yuya, which is actually going to allow you to get what you need and keep playing the game. But the main weakness of this deck is it actually can be bricky. So while I say it's consistent, what I mean by that is I mean that when it has established its board, it's very hard to come back because it is going to just consistently do what it wants to do. But if you can get your opponent to brick in that early game of turn 1 or turn 2, where they either don't have a rookie or they don't have the rookie they need to search their higher pieces, then you're going to be sitting in a pretty nice position. But that is something that you have no control over, so just watch out for that. The key cards are BT11's BlackWarGreymon X Antibody, BT11's Yuya Kuga, and BT08 BlackWarGreymon. This is the red-black BlackWarGreymon that you're going to want to go into first most of the time. So now we have Minervamon and Mirvamon, and subsequently we also have Mirvamon X Crossheart. Now, I'm lumping these in together. I'm mostly going to be covering Minervamon Loop here with Mirvamon Top End. However, I also want to discuss Mirvamon Crossheart because I think Mirvamon Crossheart is probably the best way to play that deck because of the utility that Mirvamon offers. As far as Minervamon Loop goes, it's the same purple Minervamon Lilith Loop we've been doing since about set 5, but now with Minervamon in the top end and Mirvamon. So this deck is incredibly versatile. Because of its versatility, it offers very different aggressive and defensive options, as well as strong resource loops. It also is very consistent at doing what it wants to do. Now the biggest weakness of this deck is it is somewhat piece reliant, but because of all your looping, you'll usually get to the cards in deck left that you want to stay in your deck, and then everything else you should have access to via the trash or your hand. Also, Calling from Darkness is a really big piece in this deck, but with it being limited, that somewhat hurts the deck. So for the key cards, we have Mirvamon from BT11, BT10's Minervamon, and then BT7's Calling from Darkness. Next we have Bagramon. Now Bagramon's a deck that I thought had a lot of potential in BT10, but unfortunately we don't really get to meet that potential until BT12 with Bagramon Darkness mode, I believe it's called. But we do finally get Bagramon, which is nice. So the strength is it has a lot of floodgate abilities. Almost every ability on your top end is actually a floodgate, which is pretty unique for Digimon. It has Strong Tamer, which is Uamano, which is actually a very good card that lets you use. It's sort of like a pseudo cross heart. It allows you to put sources underneath your tamer, from underneath your tamer, under your Digimon, and reduces the cost for each by 2 for each card placed under, which is very good. And it's quite consistent actually. So you're going to be getting the top end pretty frequently, as well as the addition of Lilithmon adding more consistency, and Bagramon just being a relatively strong card on his own right. The main problems of this deck is it's very slow. This deck is a very slow start, and I think if this deck had came out around like set 7, like it might have been very, very good. But because of its slow nature, it's probably just going to get OTK'd quite early on before you can even get like a consistent floodgate out. Because realistically, you can use your floodgates on turn 1 or 2, but because of their high cost, you're going to be giving your opponent so much memory. And most of the abilities are on plays. Again, this is sort of negated by Uamano's reducing for 2 to make them very cheap for just hard slamming your boss monsters. But in the case where you have to just hard slam your boss monsters, you're going to be in this really bizarre position where you're giving your opponent a lot of memory. And back in the day, you used to be able to do this with a deck called Mega Zoo, and not really worry about it as much because the cards just weren't as impactful back then, so giving your opponent 10 memory didn't very much matter. Nowadays, giving your opponent 10 memory says, please kill me next turn. So the key cards, we have BT11 Bagramon. This is a typo. It's not BT1 Lilithmon. It's actually BT11 Lilithmon. And then BT10 Uamano. Sorry, I think there's another typo or two within this. I was really tired when I worked on some of these. Next, we have Vemmon. I'm actually going to get flamed for how I said that. Now, this deck is actually really unique in the way that it plays. Vemmon, you can have up to 50 copies of it in your deck. So for that reason, it's pretty consistent because you're going to be seeing the piece you need all the time. And Gallantmon, the other secret rare, is actually relatively good. Now, the deck, being unique, also has strong power. It has good tamer removal, as well as a protection effect via Gallantmon. Now, the weaknesses is the deck seems very slow. I actually haven't tested this deck too much, so this is the biggest one on the list that I feel like I might be underrating and rating too low. But I would always rather rate a card too low and then find out later that it's actually very strong, rather than rating a card too high and giving people too much expectations for that deck. So, this deck I definitely feel like could actually go up, but for now I'm going to put it where it is. So it's very slow. It has a low aggressive output. Again, I think this could be negligible because of how many copies of Vemmon you're probably playing. You can probably just poke at them with Vemmon, but I'm not too sure. And a limited card pool. This deck only has support from set 11, and most of your deck's going to be comprised of Vemmons. So for it's like Commandramon, but if you only had one Commandramon effect. So yeah, the key cards are the secret rare Gallantmon, Vemmon, and Destromon. Destromon being the level 5 that is sort of your midway point, and a pseudo boss monster as well. Now we're moving on to Ulforce. Now Ulforce is pretty interesting. I actually think this is one of the more sleeper decks in this set. It has blocker and evade, both of which are relatively strong keywords. It has really interesting tamer loops with the new secret rare tamer Rena, allowing you to proc your on-play abilities again, which is very, very good. It has a really high ceiling as well, and there's lots of different ways to play this deck. There's like a infinite loop build, there's like the regular build, and then there's like a Leomon build as well that I've been seeing pop up. I think I also have been seeing a Gabubond build, all of which seem very strong in their own right. The deck is also incredibly consistent. No matter which build you play, maybe with the exception of the loop build, like the purple blue build, like that one might not be as consistent, but I haven't tested with it too much. They're all pretty consistent and are going to do their thing more often than not. Now the weaknesses, stack dependent is sort of like niche. I put stack dependent because the OTK infinite loop build is relatively stack dependent, and the pure build is also somewhat stack dependent. But the other builds, like the Leomon build and the Gabubon build, aren't necessarily as stack dependent. So that weakness is somewhat negligible. The main one is the Tamer dependency. You're going to be playing a lot of Tamers in this deck, so it's screaming, please Death Exmon me, which isn't something you can really afford doing a lot of the time in most decks. But Death Exmon is just such a powerful card that sometimes it's going to happen, and you just have to accept that. Now the key cards are BT11 Rena Shinanomi, and also I believe it's a BT3 Rena. Both of them are very important. BT11 UlforceVeedramon and BT11 Vemmon. Vemmon allowing you to search your pieces. Next is AncientGreymon. Now this deck I feel like is a deck that you always have to consider. And some of my points look a bit weird, but let me explain. So hyper offense, this deck is just going to blow the goal of this deck is to kill your opponent on turn 2 or 3. And you just want to draw your perfect hand as soon as possible. Now in a mulligan format, this deck is so much stronger because you get a second chance at seeing the pieces you want in your hand. It is also incredibly fast. Because of a Goonimon, you're going to just get to warp into AncientGreymon, or you can build a stack and wait a little bit. But most often than not, you're going to be OTKing your opponent with this deck on like turn 2 or 3. Now the weaknesses is it kind of feels bad to pilot this deck. Let me explain. I believe this is the only deck I wrote this on here for. And this is one that I played quite a bit and I've taken to a few events. Sometimes you're going to just destroy your opponent in the best of 3 in like 10 minutes. You're going to do both games in the best of 3. It's going to feel incredible. But other times you're going to just lose in the first 10 minutes of both sets as well. Because, like I said, it's very piece dependent, which is another weakness of this deck. you really need like 4 out of your 5 cards in your opening hand have to be just the right cards that you have to see. Otherwise, you're just gonna lose. So, and when you don't draw those cards right, it just feels really bad, and it just sort of puts you in this weird mindset the rest of the day. Now, if you don't let that get to you, or you just absolutely high roll your opponent for 9 rounds, then yeah, like this deck is very very strong. But the odds of high rolling someone for 9 rounds straight is unlikely at best, but not impossible. So the key cards we have BT4 AncientGreymon. This is the main boss monster. You're going to be wanting to use this most of the time. The P029 Aegisdramon. This is allowing you to get that reduction of evolution cost on the AncientGreymon. And then BT4 Atomic Inferno, allowing you to hit more security, also allowing you to hit a certain DP threshold. Moving on, we have Security Control. Now this deck is interesting. Security Control has always been this boogeyman of the format, and a deck that a lot of people just don't know how to play around. More experienced players are less often scared of Security Control because they'll go into a tournament prepared for it. And Security Control is a deck that I think you should always be prepared to face against. Now, it has very strong control potential, as the name implies, and strong security. Basically, the goal of this deck, if you're unfamiliar, is your security is going to be stacked throughout the game. So your opponent's going to be very scared to swing into that security and deal damage to you because they're probably going to lose whatever they're doing more often than not. And you're going to be able to recover that security quicker than they can deal damage to it, assuming it's not a deck that can blow through security very quickly. And like I said before, this deck's sort of been the boogeyman of Digimon because I would like to say this deck is really a noob slayer deck. I think this deck can consistently get to top tables because the lower skill ceiling players who aren't able to understand the inner workings of the deck and how to properly combat this deck really just get defeated after playing this deck. They don't. It also puts your opponent in this really weird mindset. And so I definitely think this is a deck to look out for, just so that you're prepared to beat it and play against it. Now the weaknesses is this deck sort of has a low pressure like game. Like you're just gonna be like poking your opponent for 1 damage most of the time. So the mirror matches are really hard for this deck because you're just gonna be both going back and forth, just swing, poke, okay, my dude dies, swing, poke. And oftentimes you're just not exerting a whole lot of pressure onto the board because you just have to waste your turn recovering or removing an opponent's body. It has very long games. Oftentimes we'll see this deck go into time on game 2 and barely be in game 2 at that. So most of the time it'll get a draw, especially in the later rounds. Now the key cards are BT8 Ophanimon Fall Down Mode, which adds a lot of versatility for this deck as well as more recovery. BT1 Magnetandramon, which is just allowing you to recover 1 early on. And then BT1 TK, allowing you to go through your security, add a card back, and then put a new card into your security. Following that, we actually have one of the biggest counters to security control, which is going to be WarGreymon. Now, the strengths of this deck is hyper aggressive. Now, what I mean by that is you're going to be swinging for a lot of security while also turning off your opponent's security effects, which is very, very strong. It also has a lot of OTK potential, similar to AncientGreymon. You're going to be hitting your opponent for often almost a game. Now, unfortunately, this deck doesn't swing for a game like AncientGreymon, where it's just going to do it in 1 turn. Usually this deck will leave your opponent at 1 or 2 security and then kill them on the follow-up, but you have to hope your opponent can't come back after that follow-up. Now what this deck does offer is it offers Digimon deletion as well, so even though you're sacrificing being able to kill your opponent in 1 turn, you often will get to pick off bodies on their field. Its weakness is the bane of most red decks is it's very bricky and high rolly. You have to sort of high roll your way through an event and play into good matchups as well as drawing the pieces you need to pilot this deck successfully. Now the key cards are WarGreymon X Antibody from BT9, BT9's Agumon X Antibody, and BT1's WarGreymon. Next we have Armor. So Armor is a very unique deck. It has a nice mix of aggression and defensive options. It has the Armor Form trait, allowing it to have the Armor Purge ability, which is a very strong ability that gives you protection on top of the already defensive options you have. And it's also incredibly consistent because your low end is often searching your higher end pieces, and your higher end pieces, while they're all dual colored, can all digivolve on top of Vemmon for a reduction in cost, which is very good. Its weakness is sometimes this deck can be somewhat slow. What I mean by that is while you get to have a nice early aggression with a pseudo rookie rush style of deck, your late game is going to be this slow grind where you're just filtering through Magnamons and Magnamon X's. And I also think this deck has somewhat of a low ceiling. That might be a bit controversial, but most of the games you see with Magnamon are sort of going to be this, I'm going to aggro you early on. If I do not kill you with my aggro, I'm now just going to fall back on my defensive option of Magnamon X and Magnamon and hope I can just outgrind you and just poke you ever so slightly. Now the key cards are BT9 Magnamon X Antibody, BT8's Magnamon, and BT8's Vemmon. Following that, we have the previous king of Digimon, Alphamon or Yukin. Now this deck, similar to Magnamon, has nice aggressive and defensive options. It has very good OTK potential with the Alphamon or Yukin line, allowing you to float back into your turn and swing for game with Oriyumon. And it's incredibly consistent because of tamers like Cool Boy and searches off Dorumon. Now the biggest problem with this deck is actually the ban list. It hit the most prevalent card in this deck, which was WarGreymon, which subsequently also hit WarGreymon X Antibody due to only having one copy of WarGreymon. That sort of butchered the deck, but we have actually seen this deck top recently, and I think with the right pilot and right deck building skills, we can maybe see this deck top again. The key cards are BT9's Alphamon or Yukin, BT9's Alphamon, and BT9's Cool Boy. Following that up, we actually have Gallantmon. So Gallantmon did get somewhat of a support bump in the EX3 set, but I'm not too sure it's enough to make this deck a top meta contender. We do have board control with all of your deletion abilities, burn pressure off of Gallantmon Crimson mode and BT2 Gallantmon, as well as Blitz being one of the better keywords for red. The weaknesses is the deck is somewhat slow. We do get a boost in that speed with the WarGreymon from EX3, and it is somewhat inconsistent. Again, this inconsistency can be mitigated if you see the EX3 WarGreymon. The key cards are EX2's Gallantmon Crimson mode, EX3's WarGreymon, and EX2's Takato Matsuki. Next we have Aegisdramon. Now Aegisdramon is a really neat deck, but unfortunately I do not see it doing too much in the meta. It has very nice swarm potential, allowing you to get bodies out from your sources. It has strong on opponent's turn skills from your Aegisdramon, allowing you to pull out bodies on your opponent's turn, getting their effects. And it also has strong when digivolving skills from things like Aegisdramon and Plesiommon. The weakness is it is very stack dependent. Because you're pulling cards out from your sources, not only do you want to have a nice mix of inheritables, as well as a mix of nice on-play effects. And it only has about one set of consistent support, being EX3, which is a smaller set regardless. And it has some support in the earlier sets, just because of the trait of some things being sea animals and aquatic. But for the most part, it doesn't have enough support to justify it. The key cards are Aegisdramon, Plesiommon, and Megaseedramon, all from EX3. Next we have BloomLordmon/Hydramon, one of the best decks I think in the format. It has very, very strong swarm potential, allowing you to get a bunch of bodies on the board for free. An incredibly powerful offense in BloomLordmon, allowing you to gain security attack and power, as well as piercing, for each of your suspended vegetation, plant, or fairies. And it has Digivolution reduction in Digisorption, which is also going to help you suspend your bodies for the effect of BloomLordmon and Hydramon. The weakness is it can be somewhat bricky. Green has the same problem as red, where sometimes you just do not draw what you need and just cannot play the game. But green has better options to play because it plays more Digimon, so it oftentimes won't brick as much as red. I do see this deck being one of the strongest decks in the format. The key cards are going to be BT10's BloomLordmon, EX3's Hydramon, and BT10's Sunflowmon. And also just all the vegetation, fairies, and plants in green. Next we have Commandramon, a deck that did get more support in EX3 actually. So this deck has very strong swarm potential. It has a powerful offense by just throwing rookies into things, and it's very cost efficient with most of your Commandramons being rookies. The weaknesses is it can be kind of bricky because you're drawing all these Commandramons that for the most part have different effects. And it also has a pretty bad Death Exmon matchup, but funny enough also is one of the best decks to utilize Death Exmon, so take that how you will. The key cards are EX3's Darkdramon, BT4's Commandramon, and BT3's Commandramon. Subsequently, every Commandramon is often played in this deck, so be aware of that. Next we have the Dragon deck from EX3, the Link Dragons. So the strength are we have a lot of big bodies. Volcanicdramon and Metallicdramon are relatively large Digimon. They're going to be getting out very strong. I mean very early. It has very strong, powerful on-play effects, which you get a proc from Digivolving with the Tamer. So not only can you hard slam these Digimon if you're in a pinch, you can also Digivolve into them and use the Tamer in order to proc their on-play effects. The weakness is it's kind of bricky because you have to run this multicolored black-red deck where it sort of has two different evolution lines while still wanting to utilize both colors, can lead in mixed results and weird stacks. It's also relatively inconsistent because of that. However, Hina is a really strong card that does allow you to get nice consistency options. The key cards are all from EX3, with the main ones being Volcanicdramon, Metallicdramon, and Hina Kurihara. Next we have the 4-grade dragons. I'm not going to lie, this deck is not very good. There's not a whole lot I can say about it. It has a very strong option card in Trial of the 4-grade dragons. And then it has some cool looking dragons that are all very cool looking cards, but that is pretty much it, to be honest. It has many more weaknesses than it does strengths, and I can't really list them all here. It's pretty inconsistent. The spell card, the option card offers some consistency in allowing you to draw one, but the deck really doesn't do anything. Like a Zulongmon lets you draw a card and then like gain some memory, and then Goldramon does things like I think you get like trash security or something based on the other dragons you have, but they're just relatively not good because they can't be digivolved on, and at the end of your opponent's turn they die. A lot, meaning you have to replay that 4-grade dragons, and the effect that lets you play them for free is a delay effect off Trial of the 4-grade dragons. So the key cards again are all from EX3. We have Trial of the 4-grade dragons, Goldramon, Azulongmon, and then subsequently we also have Magnadramon and Megidramon, the other 2 great dragons. Following that, we actually have the another secret rare deck from EX3, that being Imperialdramon. Now, I think this deck's really cool. It has a really interesting form of recursion, meaning you get to play the level 5s and the level 4s from your trash for free, allowing you to DNA, not for free, excuse me. It allows you to bring them back and then DNA Digivolve at the end of your turn. And then it has security pressure with the effect of fighter mode, and then security +1 off, I believe it's Pyildramon. It also is getting blitz and shutting off security effects, all security effects by the way, from your opponent's security. Now it only hits for 2 checks though, that's the biggest weakness, and after that early turn it doesn't do a whole lot. You can start the loop again by deleting the fighter mode, but fighter mode is going to be hitting 15, so it's not really going to die from anything, and the best way to do this was with Calling from Darkness to grab back the other pieces you needed. But unfortunately that card's limited now, so you can only really do this loop once. Again, you can use cards like Deathclaw to delete the Imperialdramon fighter mode, but you're not going to be able to get the resources back from trash, so you have to have the Flamedramon or the other one in hand as well. The weaknesses of this deck, like I said, it has that big fall off after you do your initial turn, and it's relatively inconsistent. The key cards are all from EX3, Imperialdramon Fighter Mode, Imperialdramon Dragon Mode, Flamedramon, and then subsequently the other armor from EX3, as well as red and purple Vemmon respectively. Next we have the other secret rare deck from EX3, which is Examon. Now, in contrary to Imperialdramon, actually Examon has a very niche spot in this format and can potentially take some games. It's a very strong defensive deck. Examon himself is one of the best defensive cards we've ever gotten in Digimon. Forcing your opponent to attack and having blocker and allowing to restand is very good. It also is incredibly consistent for being a dual colored deck. Oftentimes we see these dual colored decks not be too consistent, but because of all the searching you're getting off your low end, it's pretty easy to get into your top end, and you can also use your level 5s to Jogress into Examon as well, which is very good. Again, it has board control via the effect of Examon and Slayerdramon, forcing your opponent to attack and then just blocking it. And then it has burn potential 2 off Breakdramon. When one of your Digimon deletes an opponent's Digimon, you get to trash the top card of their stack once per turn. The weaknesses of this deck is it has like a low power ceiling. Most of the time you're going to want to block things and leave them unsuspended, and you can do like a free chip each turn by using Examon or Slayerdramon to swing, and then use the effect to suspend something to unsuspend, which is okay. You can use Examon's effects to unsuspend when it becomes suspended. And it's a single stack deck, so oftentimes you're going to have one big stack and then either a Slayerdramon or a Breakdramon supporting that stack on the side. The key cards are Examon from EX3, Slayerdramon from EX3, and Breakdramon from EX3. We also have Mastemon, a new deck in the format that got a lot of really good support, as well as the first SR Tamer. Now, this deck has a mix of offensive and defensive pressure. Think of security control, but actually has damage output via the Mastemon line, allowing you to recur cards and just keep jogressing and doing damage that way. It's also really consistent, which you can see here. I wrote twice. I don't know why I did that, but it is very consistent. With cards like Gatomon and Mastemon, as well as the Tamer and the Lady Devimons. And the strong Tamer. Mirai is one of the best Tamers we've ever seen. I highly recommend you going over to DigimonCard.dev and reading through the set 11 cards, because we do see the power level of a lot of older decks go up because of new support like Mirai. Weaknesses is Tamer removal. The deck, it doesn't hinge on Mirai, but it very much likes Mirai to be on board and help supporting you. And it's a very hard deck to pilot. It's very skill intensive, and I think in a long event like Nationals could lead some players to stumble just due to how skill intensive the deck can be at times. The key cards are BT11 Mirai and subsequently the new Mastemon support in BT11, as well as the star deck 10 Mastemon and Gatomon. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching. I realized while I'm editing, I forgot to put WarGreymon on this list. Big mistake, because I think WarGreymon's probably the best deck of the format, and unless there's a ban list, the most likely deck to win Nationals. I also think I forgot to put Grandis on this list, and Grandis is up there with WarGreymon for strength and potential, both of which would be S tier decks. That being said, thank you so much for watching this video. Again, link to PrimitiveKage's channel is down in the description below. It's going to be the first link. Go check it out for more informative content like this. And if you guys like this style of content, please let me know in the comments down below by liking this video, subscribing, clicking that notification bell. But yeah, let me know in the comments if you like this type of video from me, and I'll try and do more informative content like this in the future. But this was the biggest project I've done in a long time on this channel. It's taken me a couple days of work on it, so if you like it, please let me know so I can keep making content like this for you guys. And if you want to see more of me, check out the other links in the description down below as well. Those are going to be links to my Twitter, my Twitch, my other YouTube channel, as well as my Patreon if you want to support me in any way. I also have just created a Discord, so I'm really excited to announce that. That link will be in the description down below, as well as a pinned comment. So if you want to join my community, that's going to be a great way to do that, as well as contact me directly and just talk to me about card games and all life and everything. So that being said, I will see you all next time.